Hi, this is Roger from the DX shop. I'm just going to do a motor change on this BIGRAK, this SPID BIGRAK rotator. The existing motor has actually seized, so I thought I'd just do a short video showing you how to take it apart, assuming I can find all the tools I want in the time frame that I need for a video. Right, first thing you need to do, I've taken out the lock bolts here because you need to be able to slide this Jubilee clip off. Undo this Jubilee clip and slip that off completely. This is a weatherproof split ring that comes into two parts and just lifts that off. Okay, so take those off, and you need to take this top cover off now, and that's held on by 4 screws. In the case of the BIGRAK, it's 4 screws around the peripheral. 1, 2, and then 2 here. On the smaller rotators, instead of there being 2 screws here, there's 1 bolt, an M10. You'll see a thread coming through, and there's an M10 nut on there you need to take off. But on the BIGRAKs, it's 4 self-tappers that just come off with a crosshead screwdriver. Now that cover will lift off, and that's also why you need to take the bolts out, because you've got to lift that right out of the way. You can see inside now the main gear, and there's a worm gear here as well, which is the worm gear that drives the main gear round, and it's the motor that turns the worm gear. So what we have to do is extract the 3 bolts that are holding the motor on, and there's 2 externally, 1 here and 1 just underneath, and the third one is actually not a bolt, it's right. Part 2, the phone rang. Yeah, the third attachment for the motor is actually needs a flathead screwdriver to remove. So these 2 on the outside are M10s. Now again, on the smaller SPID rotators, then you'll find that those are all 3 flathead screws. They're not 10mm nuts. I'm just going to pause it a second because I need to find a 10mm spanner. Right, armed with 10mm spanner. So what we do is undo these, and what you'll find with that, they should undo reasonably well, even though it's steel into alley. They don't seem to get the weather in them, so they're okay. You don't get corrosion on them. The 2 outer ones you can take off, and they should just pretty much undo and be detachable. Voila, and the second one is under here. The third one inside won't actually come out. It's stopped from coming right out by the gear, and that is the case with the smaller ones as well. So what you need to do is take the other 2 out first, then as you undo the third one, the motor will start to move away from the housing and just back the motor away, leaving the screw in place. Right, that's the 2 10mm out. So I've got a long handled screwdriver here. As I undo this flathead one, I can now start to move the motor. It's come loose. The motor drives the worm gear. At the end of the motor there's a slot on the shaft, and that interfaces with a pin that goes across inside the worm gear. So it doesn't attach anything other than just the interference between those 2. Right, motor's off. So that's the end of the gear of the motor shaft, and you can see the slot. You can see the slot in that, and that interfaces with a pin across in the shaft. And in terms of putting the new one in, and you get the whole, when you buy a new one, you actually get the whole thing with the cables. In the case of the BIGRAK, you've got the cables, and the smaller ones you don't get it, but you get the whole motor gearbox as one assembly. In the case of the, in terms of alignment, all you need to do is make sure that shaft lines up with the gear in the worm gear, and if it isn't actually lined up, then you can actually just turn the whole worm gear just with a screwdriver, even with your finger, because it's really loose. Right, it looks actually coincidentally as if this is actually lined up. So the new motor can go on. Just hold this and get it started. It won't actually, if you haven't got the pin aligned with the slot. It won't get anywhere near going on, so you'll know you're right. Let me just start one of these external bolts to hold it. And then we can start the internal one. You can't, the internal one actually on this big rack, I have to correct what I said before, actually on the big racks like this, it will actually come, you can actually lift it out, but on the smaller ones you can't. It does stay captive behind the main gear on the main turn gear on the rotor head. So that's number 2 back on. Number 3, making sure it doesn't tip over. Number 3, put in there. And it's basically as simple as that, and then you just reassemble. Now in the case of the rack and the RAU, the smaller ones, the only additional thing you have to do before you take it apart is this part here on the smaller ones is actually detachable. It's held on by 2 bolts, a bolt here and a bolt there. And it's the little thread that comes through for the cover is actually part of it. You have to take those 2 out and get it out of the way. It just comes off. It's not it's just a structural member for stress. It doesn't actually. It's just a cover effectively. You have to take that out of the way in order to get this access to this actual 3rd bolt here. But in the case of the big rack, it's dimensionally big enough that piece there is not detachable. It's actually welded onto the frame of the unit. So, and then as you get close to doing up, the edge of the gearbox assembly has got a step in it, and you just need to make sure that step drops into the rotator apertures, because it's otherwise it won't quite line up. And that's basically it. I'll finish putting it back together, do those up, cover back on, split ring back on, Jubilee clip back on, bolts in, and off you go. Good to go. So hopefully that's helped for anybody that's going to do it themselves. We keep the motors in stock here. We ship worldwide, as you know. Thanks very much. Have a good day.